Hello and welcome to our course on Excel 2016. My name is Toby and I am your instructor on this course. I'm based in the UK and I am a Microsoft certified professional, and one of my main specialisms is in Microsoft Excel. In fact, I'm a Moz Excel specialist. Now, I'm sure you're keen to get started on learning Excel, and we're going to get started on it as soon as possible, but I do have some very important things to tell you about in this section. If you've used Excel before, it would still be a good idea for you to follow through this section. You may be able to avoid the very last part where I talk about how to acquire and install Excel. If you already have Excel installed, you probably don't need that part, but I'd like you to stick with me for most of this section. First of all then, who is this course for? Well, primarily I've written this course for people who are completely new to Excel. Now, I do assume that you have a good basic knowledge of Windows, and I do assume that you're familiar with some of the terms I'm going to use in terms of operating a modern Windows PC. You'll understand things like keyboard shortcuts, and you may even be using a touch device. I'll come back to touch devices in just a moment. If you've used a much older version of Excel, pre-2007, you might also find this course particularly useful because those early versions of Excel, a lot of things have changed. For example, there's no longer a menu system, we now use a ribbon. If you've used more recent versions of Excel, Excel 2010 or Excel 2013, the changes in Excel 2016 are mainly in more advanced topics, so in things like BI, business intelligence, and in pivot tables. There are not really many changes that affect the basics of Excel. There are one or two new features, as you'll see early on in this course, but most of the features at the basic to intermediate level have not changed substantially from Excel 2013 to Excel 2016. Also, if you've used another spreadsheet product and you'd really like to learn Excel, many of the features of that other spreadsheet product will probably be very similar to Excel. So, for example, you'll be familiar with the rows and columns and cells. But it is important that you follow through this course systematically, because it's the details where products tend to differ. And whereas in another product you may be able to say add the values of some numbers in a column in one way, in Excel it might well be completely different. So really this course is aimed at complete newcomers, people who have used other products but want to learn Excel, and people who've used much earlier versions of Excel than 2016. Now, if you have used a more recent version of Excel, I will try to point out at various times where the main new changes are, so you can pay particular attention to those. The next very important point is that particularly with Excel 2016, as with the rest of Office 2016, you now have versions of Excel which are different on different devices. So you have the conventional desktop copy of Excel, either the PC version, which is the version we're using here, or the Mac version, but you also have versions of Excel that can run on devices such as tablets, and that can also basically run in a browser, what's called the Office mobile apps, and specifically here Excel mobile app. This course is about the desktop version of Excel, if you like, the conventional version, the version that some people call the full fat version of Excel, the one with everything in it. The mobile apps are very good, particularly for use on mobile devices, but they are still cut down versions of the desktop apps, and it's the desktop app that we're looking at in this course. Given the number of devices that you can now run Excel on, it's not surprising that you may well be considering operating Excel using a touch device, using your fingers rather than using a keyboard and mouse. On this course, I am primarily using a keyboard and mouse. I will demonstrate some items using touch. The device I'm recording this course on handles both keyboard and mouse and touch. And in fact, you can also use gestures in front of the screen, although it's rather difficult to record those on a course like this. But primarily, I'll be using keyboard and mouse. Now, from this point onwards in this section, I'm going to be talking about the requirements to run Excel 2016 and how you can acquire it. So if you're already running, you may not need to watch the section beyond this point. I still recommend that you follow it through, because hopefully the information I'm going to give you and the links I'm going to be indicating will be helpful to you. Just before you leave, if you're going to though, just point out that I'm running on Windows 10. So I'm going to be using Excel 2016 on Windows 10 on this course. Now, the system requirements for Office get more complicated every time I look at them, and because there are so many ways that you can get Office and therefore Excel now, so many different configurations, there are a lot of different system requirements. Looking at the list here, you have sort of 5 routes really. You have the Office 365 subscription plans, whereby you basically buy a subscription to 365. It gives you some online facilities, and in most cases you get downloadable desktop applications as well, although not in all cases. So make sure that if you're going to use an Office 365 subscription to follow this course, that you do get the downloadable Excel 2016. You can buy the Office 2016 suite, so you can buy a suite of desktop applications which is only the desktop applications. You do get one or two things as well. You get things like cloud storage, come back to that later. You can also run Office 2016 and therefore Excel 2016 on certain Office server products, and you can still buy Office standalone applications. So for instance, you can just buy Excel 2016 as a standalone application. You don't have to get it as part of Office, although an awful lot of people do. So let's suppose you decide to buy an Office 2016 suite that will include Excel 2016. Amongst the options are Office Home and Student 2016, and the requirements listed there include the available operating systems: Windows 10, Windows 8.1, Windows 8, Windows 7 Service Pack 1. If you're still on Vista or XP, I'm afraid you're out of luck as far as Excel 2016 is concerned. You're going to need to upgrade your operating system. At the time of recording, of course, Windows XP is already obsolete, and of course Vista's days are numbered now as well. So the first thing to do is to check that your hardware is up to running Excel on its own if you're going to buy the standalone product, or Office 2016 in one of its various configurations, and then you also need to ensure that you have a suitable operating system. Now, something to bear in mind whenever I show you pages like this one from Microsoft.com or Office.com is that these pages, by the time you see this video, have probably been changed and updated. So you always need to go to the relevant link in order to get the latest information. The link itself, of course, may change. So my advice usually is to go to Microsoft.com and use the search facility, and in this case, search for system requirements for Office to see the latest version of this information. So if you haven't got Excel 2016 yet, how do you get hold of a copy? Well, first of all, you check your hardware and your software are up to the job, as I indicated just now. Then you either buy a copy or you get a free trial version. You can buy a copy from your local computer store, probably. You can buy copies online, either from Microsoft themselves or from other well-known online retailers, and I'm sure you know who I'm talking about. Or you can get a trial version. There's a try for free version here for home or for business. So let's say try for free for home. And that gives us the option to try Office 365 for free. Now, I won't keep saying this, but I will say it just this once more. Don't forget, these pages may well have changed by the time you come to use this video, and this trial offer may also change. But basically, at the time of recording this, fairly typically a 1-month free trial based on Office 365. So pretty good deal, and if you crack on with it, you can probably get through this course in a month, including doing the exercises, and then you'll be fully confident in Excel before you actually spend money on it. One thing that I certainly won't be covering on this course is how to install and activate Office 2016 or Excel 2016 on your device. There are so many different options now that you really need to go to Microsoft.com to check that. For example, if you go to Office 365 Frequently Asked Questions and scroll down there are a couple of very useful sections here. There's a section on Office Trials, which will tell you about the setup for trials, the steps you need to take to sign up for a trial, for example. And then further down on this page, it's got sections there such as how do I install Office? How can I install Office on my Mac? And so on. The instructions you need are there embedded within these pages with links to various other locations on Microsoft.com or Office.com. That's a much better source for information about installing Office or Excel than I can provide. And of course, you should always look for the most up-to-date information. So from this point onwards, I'm going to assume that you have Excel installed. And from my Windows 10 desktop, what I'm going to do is go down to the search box down there and start typing Excel. And there is Excel 2016. Note desktop app, it's the desktop app that we need. And when Excel 2016 starts up, you should see something like this. Now I'm going to explain this screen to you a little bit more in a couple of sections time, and that's where we're going to carry on and start using Excel, but I've got one or two other things to explain first, and the first of those is the location and use of the course files and the exercise files we're going to be using throughout this course, and that's what we're going to cover in the next section. So the first thing you need to do is to make sure that you can start up the Excel 2016 desktop app and that you can see something like this. That's the end of this section. I'll see you in the next one. Hello again and welcome back to our course on Excel 2016. In this short session I'm going to talk to you a little about what's new in Excel 2016. Now for those of you who are new to Excel, you won't really know what's old in Excel 2016, so this may not really help you very much. But for those of you who are looking for an update, let me just give you a brief overview of what is new. The page that I'm looking at now is on Office.com, and it lists the new and improved features in Office 2016. If you work your way through the contents of this page, you'll see that many of the features apply to Excel. And in fact, some of the major features which are specific to Excel are really at a much more advanced level than the level we're going to in this course. So, for example, there are some much improved features in relation to what's called BI, Business Intelligence, and in relation to pivot tables. But there are also some new chart types, and we'll be looking at charts later on in this course. And a particular new feature which is pretty much across the board in Office 2016, which is the feature. Another broadly available feature is the extension to the available Office themes, and I'll be looking at that quite early on in this course. Many of the other features, such as those related to sharing and features such as Smart Lookup, are either going to look at much later on or in a later one of our series of courses, or in one or two cases such as Smart Lookup. It's probably a good idea to try it out yourself early on in your use of Excel 2016. So there are a few of the key points which have broader applications, If you want to see the new and improved features specific to Excel, if we click on Excel here, that takes us to this page, which gives us information about the 6 new chart types, and then about those more advanced features: get and transform, one-click forecasting, 3D maps, and then those specifics that I've already mentioned, one of them being tell me, which we're going to look at a little bit later on in the course, smart cut, which you might want to read up about and try out for yourself. You'll find it on the review tab on the ribbon in Excel 2016. You'll know what I mean by that a little bit later on. And then we also have details of the new themes. Again, we'll be looking at that in a little while on this course. Some useful information there about what's new in Excel 2016. Some of it really won't mean much to you at the moment, but hopefully by the end of this course, quite a bit of it will. That's the end of. Welcome back to our course on Excel 2016. Now, before we actually get started on making an Excel workbook, I want to talk very briefly about the use of a touch device. Now, those of you who intend to follow this course using a device, either all of the time or some of the time, need to know one or two very important things before we really get started. And that's what I'm going to cover in this section. Now, before I go any further, I should point out we are dealing with the full desktop Excel 2016 application. There is a specific cut down version of Excel designed for use with touch devices, with small screens such as phones and small tablets. That's not the version of Excel that we're using here. We're using the full desktop application, but you can use it with touch. Now, as I'm going to show you in the next section, if I wanted to create a new workbook, I would click on one of these templates. In this case, I'm going to click on that blank workbook template there, and it's going to create a new empty workbook. Up the top left hand corner of the screen, there's something called the Quick Access Toolbar. And one of the commands that you should see on this toolbar is this little picture with a little finger pointing at a button. And if I click on the little arrow to the right of it, it lets me switch between the two modes of using Excel. Mouse mode, which is the mode I'm going to be using almost all the time, and touch mode. Now, what touch mode does, as it tells you there, is that it gives you more space between commands, and then Excel is optimized for use with a touch device. If you're going to use a touch device and follow the course with a touch device, mostly it will be absolutely fine, but I do suggest that the very first thing you do once we start up Excel and start creating workbooks is to switch to touch mode. Now, look what happens to this ribbon along the top of the screen here when I switch to touch mode. Look at all those commands. Everything is spaced out more. In fact, the commands that you can see seem to dramatically change. They perhaps haven't changed quite as much as you think they have, but they're definitely more spaced out. And the reason they're more spaced out is it enables you to operate Excel with your fingertips. Having that extra bit of spacing makes it much easier to target the particular commands that you're trying to use. Now, there are some other differences as when you employ touch mode. For instance, these little rectangles within the main window called the cells of the workbook, if I click on one of them with the mouse, which is what I'm going to do, you see the cross cursor there. If I click, that cell is selected. You notice the little rectangle with it. Now let me select a different cell, but this time I'm going to use my fingertip. I get a different selection marker there. I get that rectangle, but with the two little circles, one on each corner. So that gives me a completely different selection shape. In addition, let me select a different cell again, but this time instead of just tapping with my fingertip, I'm going to tap and hold. Watch what happens. I get a bigger square if I hold for long enough. Now when I release my finger, I not only have that cell selected, but I have what's called a mini toolbar, a set of the tools that I'm most likely to use having selected a cell. And on that mini toolbar, at the right hand end, I have a little drop down arrow, and if I tap on the drop down arrow, I get what's called a contextual menu. Now, these are features associated with using touch in Excel 2016. There are more of them, and I'll talk about more of them later on. But I do suggest that if you are going to use a touch device, as soon as we get started, switch to touch mode, and you will see some different behavior in terms of things like the shape and size of that mini toolbar, how selections look, and so on. But generally speaking, you'll be able to follow the course fine, but some things, as you've seen here, will look just a little bit different. Having said that, if you have a forward choice between touch and mouse and keyboard, I do suggest you use mouse and keyboard because it's much easier to be accurate, and that's the approach that I'm going to be using almost all of the time. And one final point is that with the release of Excel 2013, not 2016, there was a blog post on office.com explaining in quite a bit of detail how touch can be used very effectively with Office, including Excel. And I still think that's a very good source of information if you want to find out more about how to use touch with Excel. It started out with 2013, but it applies equally to Excel 2016. So if you want to find out more about that, that's a very good place to look. I haven't seen an equivalent for Excel 2016 at the time of recording this course. Of course, somebody at Microsoft may bring one out, and of course there are various other independent posts by people about how to use touch with Microsoft Office software. That's the end of this section. Please join me. Welcome back to our course on Excel 2016. As I mentioned before, I'm actually using Windows 10 here, and before we start to create a workbook, and before we actually start working Excel, I'm going to pin Excel to the Windows 10 taskbar to make it easy for me to start Excel. Now, depending on which version of Windows you're using, Windows 7, Windows 8, 8.1, you may want to pin Excel to the taskbar, or maybe put a shortcut to Excel onto your desktop. Now, if you're not sure how to do those things, go to Microsoft.com, search on those. There are various links there to explain how to do it. In the case of Windows 10, if I just click in the search box down the bottom here and start typing Excel, I soon see Excel 2016. If I right click on that, one of the options is Pin to Taskbar. And I now have a little icon on the taskbar which I can use as a shortcut starting Excel. Let me now click on that icon, and Excel starts. Now, first of all, on the left I have a recent files list, and you'll see that the recent files list is actually empty. So to all intents and purposes, this is the first time that I'm using Excel on this device. If I already have some workbooks, perhaps workbooks that I've got from somebody else, or workbooks that I've created in an earlier version of Excel, I could use this Open Other Workbooks option here, but I'll come back to that a little bit later on in this section. Now, what I'm actually going to do in this section is to take you on a sort of whistle-stop tour of creating and saving one or two workbooks in Excel 2016, just to give you a sort of general idea of how the whole thing works. Now, if I want to create a workbook, a new workbook, which is going to be almost the first thing that I do, I can start with one of these what are called templates on the right. Now, if you look at that template, for example, the one I've highlighted, Academic Calendar, if I were to select that, it would give me the option of creating a workbook which can be used as an academic calendar, and much of the structure of the workbook that I needed would be contained within that template. Now, I am going to come back to templates later on, so I'm not going to worry too much about them at the moment. What I'm going to do is the very first option. I'm going to choose here blank workbook, which will give me a blank workbook. However, a couple of things first. First of all, I suggest that if you haven't used Excel before, or you've only used a very old version of Excel, one of the first things you do is to take this tour of Excel. I'm not going through it now, I'm going to leave you to go through that yourself, but it is a very useful tour. The other thing that I'm going to do before we create our first workbook is I'm going to sign in to an account. Now, this is a particular aspect of using Office in general and Excel in particular that gets a lot of people very confused. Try and briefly explain it here, but clearly enough that you know which account you need to sign in with. First of all, why do you sign in to an account? Well, there are a couple of reasons. Probably the main reason is from a licensing point of view, and of course Microsoft, like all other software providers, are very keen to make sure that users of the software are properly licensed. So generally they want you to sign into an account, and then they know who you are, and particularly that you've paid for the software that you're using. But there are other reasons as well, and one of them is that to give you access to your cloud storage, your OneDrive account with Excel 2016, so that you can securely and safely save workbooks online, so that you can share them with other people, or in fact with your own other devices. It's important to sign in securely with an account as well. So there are good reasons for signing into an account. Which account you sign into very much depends on the nature of your Excel 2016 application. If, for example, you bought Excel either as a standalone product or as part of Office 2016, you may just sign in with a regular Microsoft account. But if you've got Excel 2016 as part of Office 365, or perhaps as part of your employer's Office 365, then you need to make sure that you're signing in with an appropriate account that gives you access to the license which you're using to run Excel 2016. Now in my case, this copy of Excel 2016 is provided via an Office 365 business account. So the account is in the name of my employer, Toby A, and as an individual person with a license within that corporate Office 365 account, I'm just TA. I'm going to sign in as TA within my company. Now, if all of this sounds like mumbo jumbo, you want to find out more about it, if you click on this Learn More link here, it gives you access to a pretty good explanation of the sort of licensing Microsoft account factors, and explains what you need to do and why you need to do it largely. So have a read through there if you're not clear on which account to use and why you use an account at all. But I am now going to sign in as me. So put in my email address. Before I go any farther, you'll see that email address quite a bit actually during the course. I should point out that is not a monitored email address. I don't reply to emails on that email address. So it's not even worth trying to send me an email because I won't reply to it. It's only used to access this Office 365 version of Excel 2016. So having put in my email address, now my password, and once I've successfully signed in, as you can see at the top right there, you can now see my name and my email address. Now it is important to realize that I'm not restricted to only running this using one account. So I could have this set up to run a number of accounts. So say colleagues that share a PC can each log in with their own account to use this installation of Excel. But I will generally during this course stick with that one account from now on. So it's finally time to create a workbook. We're going to create a blank workbook. We're creating it from this screen, which is called the Start screen. That name will be important a little bit later on. So I'm going to click on Blank Workbook. And I get a blank workbook. Now the workbook is in effect a set of worksheets. And by default in Excel 2016, you get one worksheet when you create a workbook, and the name of the worksheet is on this tab at the bottom. It's just by default called Sheet 1. Now below where it says Sheet 1 you've got a thing called a status bar, and I'm going to tell you about that in a later section. And above the sheet is this whole rectangular area here. There is an entry bar and there is the ribbon, and above them you have what's called the Quick Access Toolbar. Now all of these I'm going to be covering in the coming sections in quite a bit of detail. For the moment I just want to concentrate on putting some data into the worksheet itself. Now before I do, I hope you remember me to tell those of you particularly who are using touch about touch and mouse mode. Make sure that you're in mouse mode if you're using a mouse, because you get more commands on them and you're going to find it's a lot easier to be accurate when you're using mouse and keyboard. Now looking at this worksheet, it's arranged in a sort of grid, and the grid is made up of horizontal rows. The rows are numbered, so row 2, row 3, the numbers are down the left hand edge there. And there are many rows that you cannot see. You can see numbers 1 to 39 there, but if I scroll down, you can in fact have thousands of rows, thousands and thousands of them. They go on apparently forever. The columns are vertical and they're referred to by letters normally, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, although in fact you can switch to numbering those as well, but the default is to use letters. When you get to Z, whoever invented Excel said, oh, I've got to Z, have I got to stop there? And somebody else said, no, let's call the next AA, AB, and so on. And again, you can have thousands and thousands of columns. Now at an intersection of a row and a column, you have something called a cell. And the left cell there, the one that's currently selected, you can see the board around it, is the cell A1. We normally refer to it by its column letter A and its row number 1. So this, for instance, is cell L5, and this one is G7. Now the first thing that I'm going to do, rather unexcitedly, is to put some data into this worksheet. And when a cell is selected, to put, say, a number in, all I need to do is to type the number on my keyboard. So what about 23? Now that number having appeared, you'll notice that the cursor is still flashing to the right of the 3 within the cell. And in order to work in another cell, I need to select another cell. So let's select the cell next to it, H7, and let's put a different number in H7. Let's put in there 19. Again, let's click in I7, put a different number in there, 62, and so on. In a cell you can put numbers, words, you could show the dates, you can do arithmetic, you can add stuff up, and you can also format the cells, as we'll see later on. You can change the colour of the characters, the numbers in this case. You can put a border around a cell, and all sorts of exciting things with cells, and we'll be covering those later on in the course. But for the moment, all I've done here is to put a number in each of 3 cells. Now, generally speaking, when you're working in Excel and you're making workbooks, each workbook being made up of 1 or more worksheets, you are going to want to save what you've done. You have to save your work. So the first thing I'm going to do now is to save this workbook. Now, in order to do that, we go into what is called Backstage View, or just Backstage. And to access Backstage View, we click on this word File up here. It's actually the leftmost word above the main body of the ribbon. So click on File, and it takes us into this Backstage View. And one of the options there is Save As. Clicking on Save as in general with Windows software, gives me a facility to save the work I'm doing, in this case the workbook, as a file, and I can save it in one of a number of different places. Now this is where things get a little bit more complicated, in that exactly which places you have available to you will not be the same as the places that I have available to me. Because my Excel is a company 365 account, I have a OneDrive location I could save it to. I have a SharePoint site I could save it to. I have a personal OneDrive I could save it to. I can also save it to this PC, and on this occasion I'm going to save it to this PC. Now I mentioned to you earlier on the demo files, the course files that I'm using. I'm going to save this in an empty version of that demo file, that course file folder, and then during the course, as you'll see, I'll build up to the collection of files that you've seen already much earlier on in the course. And these of course are files that you have access to, so you can see these files. So from this PC I'm going to browse to that particular folder. So I use a standard Windows file browse there, And there is the empty folder where I'm going to save this particular workbook. Now the default file extension for an Excel workbook is XLSX, and I'm going to call this one, not a very exciting name I know, I'm going to call it Demo 1. Now it's quite okay to put spaces in file names, some people don't like them, but I don't mind them at all. Having name in, I click on Save, and my workbook is now safely saved. Not only is it safely saved, but if you look at the top middle of the screen, you'll see that the name I've given it is now displayed at the top middle of the screen. A workbook, when you create a new one, gets a default name like Book 1 or Book 2. Once you've given it your own name, then that's the name it'll stick with from now on, unless of course you decide to change it later on. So I've created a workbook and I've saved it and I've put some numbers in it. The numbers are rather unexciting, they're not doing anything useful at the moment, but let's suppose I've finished work for the moment. One option available to me now is to close this workbook. It's not a good idea to leave workbooks open. Somebody might come along, lean on your keyboard, accidentally put some numbers in there. To close the workbook, if I go back into Backstage View again, one of the options there is Close. So let me click on Close. That workbook is closed. And now note that Excel is still open, but I have no workbook open. The area that was occupied by the workbook and its single worksheet is now blank. And this is the point at which we're going to resume in the second half of this getting started part of the course. So please join me for that. Welcome back to our course on Excel 2016. In this section, I'm going to cover the use of the ribbon in some detail. If you've used a relatively recent version of Excel before, you may be pretty familiar with the ribbon and you may well not need to go through this section at all. If on the other hand you haven't used the ribbon before, or you've used a much older version of Excel, maybe one of the early versions that use the ribbon, or you want to find out about key tips or auto hiding the ribbon, then I suggest you through this section, because I'm going to try to cover it fairly thoroughly to give you all of the basic things you need to know to get the best out of using the ribbon. The ribbon is this rectangular area here, and above the rectangular area there are individual words or phrases, and these correspond to the tabs. The ribbon is actually made up of a number of tabs. You can't see all of the tabs here at the moment. Some of them are only shown under certain circumstances. You can in fact add your own tabs, but the ones you see here are the basic default. A couple of exceptions. On the left, the word file there, as you know, gives you access to Backstage View. Technically it's not really a ribbon tab at all. And on the right we have the new Tell Me feature. So in fact the ribbon I've got here has 7 tabs: Home, Insert, Page Layout, Formulas, Data, Review. If you see a different list to that, or will be revealed later to explain what that is. Now one thing to notice straight away is that Home is highlighted. We say that the Home tab is selected, but on the ribbon you see a lot of greyed out controls. Most of those are various types of command. They're ways of doing things to your Excel workbooks. But on the Home tab they are currently all greyed out, and the reason they're greyed out is that you couldn't actually use any of them at the moment. And the reason you can't use them at the moment is because I don't have a workbook open. Now let me open one of the recently opened workbooks. So let me go into Backstage View. Let's try Demo 1 again. And you see that the controls on the Home tab on the ribbon are no longer grayed out. You could actually use those commands, and in fact if I click on a couple of the other tabs, let's look at the Insert tab, they are not grayed out either. Let's go to Page Layout, Formulas. Now when you get to Formulas, are one or two, there's one there, a command that's still grayed out. Now the fact that that's grayed out means that I couldn't do whatever it does at the moment with my current situation. So let's go back to the Home tab then, and let's see what we can do. Let's suppose I type in the currently selected cell the word hello. Now, having typed hello, if I click on the enter tick there next to the formula bar, now I'm going to go up to the B command here, the one that I've currently got selected, bold. I'm going to click that, and it makes the text in that cell bold. Now, the commands on each tab of the ribbon are divided into groups, and the groups are separated by these tiny little thin vertical lines. So on the Home tab you have a clipboard group, a font group, note the name at the bottom of the groups, an alignment group, a number group, and so on. On the Insert tab you have a tables group, an illustrations group, an add-ins group, and so on. And within each group you have individual controls. So for instance, on the Page Layout tab, in the Themes group, you have a Themes button, a Colors button, a Fonts button, and an Effects button. So you have a structure to the ribbon. You have the ribbon, you have the tabs, you have the groups, you have the controls. So let's look now at some of the other aspects of these controls. There are very many different groups, and if you take, for example, the one on the left of the Home tab, the Paste button, it's actually a two-part button. Many of them are two-part buttons. I've currently got the cursor over the top half of the button, and you notice the screen tip there, Paste. Control plus V is the keyboard shortcut, and then there's that screen tip description. We talked about these earlier in the course. Add content on the clipboard to your document. Now, the lower half of the same button with the arrow is actually a drop down which gives us a selection of options, and this selection will be dependent on the exact situation that you're in. So depending on what you're pasting into and what you've got on the clipboard, you'll get a selection of options there. Now, some of the other buttons, like this cut button here for example, is a straightforward simple button. To the right in the font group we have a font selection drop down list here. So if I click on the arrow, I have a list of all the fonts available on my device that I can use, and to the right of that I have a list of available sizes. Now sometimes, as with this font size list, although you have a number of available sizes, so as you can see here 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 14, if I selected 12 that's fine, but I can actually type in a size as well. So I could type in 13 if I wanted 13 point. So you're not necessarily limited to the sizes in the actual button. So the controls correspond to various types of commands. Some of them are simple click buttons, there's drop downs, there's split buttons, and so on. And during the course we'll be looking at these many different types of control and command. If you take the font group here for example, there are quite a few commands in there that enable you to, for instance, make text bold or italicize it or underline it, and as you've already seen you can change the font that's used and the font size and so on. So you have a whole selection of buttons and options, but in the bottom right hand corner of the font group there is a tiny little button that's called a dialog box launcher, and if I click on the dialog box, that's that one there, it brings up a conventional type of dialog. It's a format cells dialog, and the font page within that dialog is selected. So if rather than use all of those individual buttons you want to use a dialog like this one, as I say, a much more conventional type of control in Excel, you can certainly do that, and many people, including me, sometimes prefer to bring up a dialog and make a whole load of things at once, and then obviously once I've made all my selections I click OK to activate them, or if I change my mind or want to start again I can use the cancel button to cancel. Note the question mark there, which will normally take me through to online help on the particular dialog, the selected page that I'm using at that time. Sometimes, let me just cancel this, sometimes if you go to a regular command like this one, conditional formatting, you get a drop down list of possible options. If I go to say manage rules here, I get a dialog that enables me to manage my conditional formatting rules. So there are many situations in which dialogues appear, and they in turn will have many options, and sometimes a better option or a more convenient option than using the individual commands on the ribbon. Let me just close that one. Let's move on to some of the ways of using the ribbon that you may not be familiar with, even if you've used it before. The ribbon takes up quite a bit of space, and quite often when you're working in Office programs in general, Excel in particular, space is at a premium, and you may want or need to use some of the space that's occupied by the ribbon. One of the complaints that's often made about the ribbon is that it takes too much space on the screen. The top right hand corner of the Excel window, there is a button. It's ribbon display options, and if you click on ribbon display options, there are three. There's auto hide, show tabs, and show tabs and commands, and by default tabs and commands is selected. That's basically seeing all of the detail of the ribbon. If I switch to show tabs, watch what happens. The ribbon itself is no longer visible, and all I can see is the tabs. Now you may think that's going to be a little bit problematic. You'd think, well, how the heck do I find all of the commands that I need? You'd normally use this option when you're already fairly familiar with where everything is on the ribbon, and you don't need to be able to see the ribbon to find the things that you want. So for example, let's suppose I wanted to make the word hello in I10 italic. I know it's on the home tab in the font group, so all I need to do is to click the home tab, and then as if by magic the ribbon appears. I find the command I want, in this case the italic command. Watch what happens when I click on italic. That's italicized. I could underline as well if I wanted to, do anything else I want to it, and as soon as I finish what I'm doing, the ribbon disappears again and gives me that space back. Now if at any time I want to switch back to the ribbon being shown all the time, I choose the third option. Now an even more extreme option is auto hide ribbon, and this hides the ribbon and the tabs. Now you may think it's actually quite difficult to do anything at all without being able to even see the tabs, but if all you need to do is to click up here at the very top, and the tabs and the ribbon itself will reappear for you to do something. So let's say switch off the underlining here and switch off the italic again, and then as soon as I've finished, the ribbon is hidden once I've completed the operations I'm performing there. You might use this for example if all you want to do is to enter some data into the cells in a book, or to use features whereby you don't need the ribbon at all. Believe me, it will happen from time to time, and then at whatever point you finish with that, it's very straightforward to go back to one of the other settings, because you still have up here the ribbon display options button. You can click that, and you could for example go straight back to showing tabs and commands again. Now let me look at a couple of other useful features of the ribbon. I've already mentioned going into touch mode if you're using a touch device. Don't forget the button there that lets you switch between mouse mode and touch mode. And of course in touch mode everything is spaced out more for your fingers. And another very useful feature, particularly for people with certain types of disability, but in many cases for people who prefer to use a keyboard to use a mouse, there is a very useful feature that's known as using key tips. Now if you operate the ribbon and its commands using the keyboard rather than mouse, the problem you have knowing what all of the keyboard shortcuts and key sequences are. If you press the Alt key, just press it, release it, you are given a set of single key stroke ways of accessing the tabs on the ribbon. In fact, if you above those, you'll also see some numbered keys for the Quick Access Toolbar. We're going to look at the Quick Access Toolbar in the next section. But let's suppose I now want to go to the Page Layout tab. I don't want to use the mouse. All I need to do is to press the P key on the keyboard, That not only takes me to the page layout tab, but it also gives me a set of single and double key combinations that enable me to operate the commands on this tab. So if, for example, I wanted to check or change the orientation of the pages here, if I press the O key, it actually operates the orientation key, and then I can choose using the up and down arrows whether I want my pages to be portrait or landscape orientation. And when you finish using this particular feature, if the key tips are still visible, you can just press the Alt key to hide them again. In the early stages of using Excel 2016, the tabs that you see there and the commands on those tabs are probably going to be plenty for the kind of things that you're going to be doing. But there are other tabs, as I mentioned before, and in fact you can even create your own tab and put your own groups and commands on it. Now, we're not going to go into this customization of the ribbon here, but I am going to talk about customization in relation to the quick access toolbar in the next section, and on the basis of that you may want to try to experiment with a little bit of customization. Let me just show you where that happens. If you click on the File tab to go into Backstage View and go into Options, one of the pages there is Customize Ribbon. And from there, not only can you customize the ribbon from the point of view of adding your tabs and so on, but you can also, for example, make some tabs visible or invisible. So for example, if you look at these check boxes down here, the developer tab is not shown. If I check that now, you'd also see a developer tab. So that's all of the basics about the ribbon for now. One thing I haven't gone into is the new Tell Me feature, and I'm going to cover that in a couple of sections from now. Although it's on the ribbon, it works in a subtly different way really to the rest of the ribbon, and as it's a new feature, I've set aside a separate short section for that. So that's the end of this section. I'll see you in the next. Hello again and welcome back to our course on Excel 2016. We've looked at filling a series of cells. A couple of times already in the course we looked particularly at filling a series of the months of the year. But in fact many times when you're working with Excel you'll find that the data follows one or more distinct patterns. Now let me just quickly do again something we've done a couple of times already. I'm just going to type January in that cell, and this little block, this little icon, the bottom right hand corner of the border here, it's called the fill handle. And if I pull the fill handle across, let's just go to there, say, you've already seen that you get the months of the year. Let me just undo that, go back to just having January. But this, instead of pulling across with that fill handle, what I'm going to do is to select the cells up to R4. So I'm going to hold the shift key down. It's R4 and all the cells between G4 and R4 are selected. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the fill drop down in the editing group, the home tab, and I'm going to select fill right. And what happens this time, instead of getting the months of the year, is that I get the same cell content, in this case the word January, in each of those cells. So that isn't a series fill, what we refer to, it's really just a fill right. Now let me undo that yet again. There is a keyboard shortcut for fill right that you'll probably find yourself using quite a bit. It's Control R. Let me do Control R here, and that gives you a straightforward way of doing a right fill. But in that case what you're doing is effectively copying the contents of one cell into a number of other cells. Let me just go back, let me undo that yet again, and I'm going to type February in H4. Again I'm going to select G4, put the shift key down. Now I'm going to do my right fill again, Control R. What do you think's going to happen? That's right, you still get January in every cell, because basically with my leftmost cell selected, I select the range of cells I want to fill, and basically it goes left to right filling those cells. Now similarly, if I were to hold the shift key down and click in G14, I could do a fill down, which is Control D, or let me just undo that, click in G4 again, use the fill handle to drag down, and I get a sequence of months again. Now it's important to realize that you can't only fill right and down, you can also do up and left. Let's suppose I put the word hello here. And if I wanted to basically have hello going up the sheet, say I'm starting here in U23, if I select a cell above that, go to the fill drop down, do a fill up, that works the same. And in fact, if I click in M10 with the shift key held down, so a rectangular selection, I could do a fill left and so on. So you can basically work in any direction on the sheet, and of course you can do series in any of those directions as well. So if instead of hello in this first cell here, I'd put January, I'd use the fill handle to go left, and then I could even use the fill handle to go up. So as you can see, you can build some pretty sophisticated patterns. Now the examples that I've used here have been relatively straightforward. Now I want to something a little bit more complex, and we're going to use a very important series dialog for this example. So in cell H30 I'm going to type a date. I'm going to type a date of the 3rd of January 2015. Let's suppose that I want to do a sequence of cells in row 30 starting on the 3rd of January 2015. I want to have the step as 17 days, a very strange amount. Now to work out what those individual cell values will be, well, 17 plus 3, the next one would be the 20th of January, and then another 17, that's the 6th of February, and so on. But it becomes a little bit complicated to keep going up in steps of 17 days. Well, one way that you can do this is to use the series dialog. And if I click on that fill drop down again, there's an option series, and then it's got a dot dot dot. Now whenever you get a dot 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 on an option on these menus from the ribbon, it means you're going to see a dialog if you click on that. And in this case you have the series dialog, which lets you build very sophisticated series on your worksheets. So first of all, do we want to go in rows or columns? Well, I'm going to go in rows. I'm going to go across the row. What type of series is it going to be? Is it going to be a linear series? Is it going to be a growth series, something that's getting bigger? Is it going to be a date series, or is it some sort of autofill? What I'm going to do is to make this a date series, and the date units I measure are going to be days, but the step value here is going to be 17 days. So I'm going to build a series that goes up 17 days at a time. Now the stop value basically says, where do I want this series to stop? Now I'm going to randomly choose a date. I'm going to say I want it to stop on the 31st of October 2015. And there it is. Notice, as I pointed out earlier in the course, that where the columns aren't wide enough to accommodate those dates, I get the hashes. Let's select all of those cells. Let's auto fit the column width so you can see them all properly. And there you are, starting at the 3rd of January, 20th of January, 6th of February, 23rd of February, and so on. Now it is true that pretty much any series that you can do with the series dialog, you could actually set up to do using the fill handle type approach, but it can get quite complicated, and you'll quite often find the series dialog is a more convenient way of doing things. You can very simply, for example, just do a series of numbers. It doesn't have to be dates or months or something. If I had a 2 in this cell and a 5 in this cell, let me now extend those with the fill handle, then I still get a series of numbers increasing 3 at a time. So I can do that without using the series dialog, but the series dialog often makes it a much more straightforward thing to set up. Another point to make here is that, let's go back to that left hand one, let's put 100 in there. If you're using the series dialog, let's say that you're doing, in this case, rows linear, and your step value, instead of being 3 as it was just now, you made -6 and said stop when you get to -100, that's fine as well. And you can of course count down dates as well. So that's it on fill and series fill. In the next section we're going to take a look at flash fill. So please join me. Welcome back to our course on Excel 2016. In this section I'm going to look at flash fill. You've already seen how to use fill and series fill. In the last version of Excel, a feature was introduced called flash fill, and this adds a layer of intelligence to fill. To demonstrate it first of all with this straightforward example, I've got a list here of what IMDb says at the time of recording this are the top 50 movies of all time according to the votes of their subscribers. And in column A I've got the name of the movie, in column B I've got the year of release. Now let's suppose that I wanted to make a column C where I put the name of the movie with the year of release in brackets afterwards. So if for instance I go in here to C2 and type in, and then I put a bracket and I put the year of release afterwards, and then I go down to the next cell and start typing the same thing again. Watch what happens as soon as I start typing. I'm just going to type the T of The Godfather. Now as soon as I type something which is different from the Shawshank Redemption, what Excel does is to look at the columns there, A and B to the left, and it tries to work out if it could make what was typed in C2 out of what's in A2 and B2. And it says yes, I can. I can put the contents of A2, a space, a left bracket, the contents of B2 and a right bracket. And if I applied the same principle to row 3, it would say The Godfather, space, bracket, 1972, close bracket. Once it's done that, it then basically forecasts or predicts what all of the others are going to look like and puts them in there in effectively in grey, in a sort of provisional, well, this is what I think you want. And if you look at that and you say, yeah, that's exactly what I want, in fact, all you need to do is to press the enter key and all of those cells are filled in for you. Now if at this point it had done the wrong thing and I realised I'd set this up perhaps in the wrong way and it wasn't going to work, I could press the escape key and then it wouldn't save all of those for me. But let's press the enter key. And there you are, everything is done. Now that can be a real time saver, particularly if you have long lists of some things and you want to combine them in that way. There are limitations on what you can do using flash fill, but it's pretty good at joining things together. And let me just quickly demonstrate to you that it's pretty good at splitting things apart as well. So let's see what flash fill can do with extracting the family names from this class register. Family name is in column B. The starting name, that's the family name, comma, first name or given name, is in column A. So start with John Beale. His family name is Beale. Now let's try Millie Clayton. And as you can see, cope with that very well. It's got all those family names sorted out okay, so I'll go with that. And what about first name? And once again, it's fine with that as well. So that's separated out the family names and the first names in my class register. That's it. That's flashfill. I'll see you in the next section. Welcome back to our course on Excel 2016. This is the business expenses worksheet so far. And having found out quite a bit about formatting a worksheet and making sure that everything is starting to look pretty good, what we're now going to do is turn to what is probably Excel's greatest strength and probably the reason that most people use Excel, which is to do some kind of calculation or analysis. Whether your strength is in calculation or whether you're doing it somewhat reluctantly, you'll find that many of the things that you need to do in Excel are pretty straightforward, and we're going to start with two really straightforward examples of calculations in Excel. And in doing that, I'm going to demonstrate the general principles of doing calculations in Excel 2016. So the first thing I'm going to do is to apply a little bit of zoom. Now let's do some work on the total amount of Toby's expenses over the period that is in that table of values. What I'm going to do is to put total in this cell here, F9. And first of all, I'm going to do this whole thing pretty badly, or at least you'll see in a few minutes time that it was done pretty badly. And that is, I'm just going to put a simple formula in here to add up the figures in column F. Generally speaking, if in a cell, rather than putting a number like an amount of currency or some text like the word travel or a date, you want to put a formula, that's something that involves a calculation, you put an equal sign. And that's how you always begin cell contents where there's a calculation to do, so equals. And now you actually enter the formula. Now, in this, what I want to do is this. I want the contents of F4, so that's F4, and I just type F4, and then I say plus, and then I want F5, and then I want, and so on. So let me just put the others in, and that's a formula. Now at the moment in the cell you can see the formula, but if I enter that value now, either by hitting the enter key or using the enter tick mark by the formula bar, let's see what happens. I actually get the total amount of the expense claim over that period. Now before we go any further, there's one very important point to recognize here, and that is that cell F9 is now unlike the other cells on this sheet because it has both a value, its value is $305.20, and it has a formula, and its formula is the formula in the bar. So when you click in the formula bar, you see in the formula bar the formula, which you also actually see in the cell in that situation. But if you select the cell, it's the value that you see. So cell F9 has got a formula and a value. And closely associated with that is the fact that without changing the formula, the value may change. So let's suppose that I spot an error in my expenses. Let's suppose that the error I spot is that that annual subscription $64.50 should actually be $84.50. So there was a mistake, $20 made there. Let me change it to 84.5. Tick. Automatically the value in F9 is increased by $20. And when change to a cell in Excel, any consequential changes are automatically carried out. So in this case, when I change the value in F7, F7 is part of the formula for F9, so the value of F9 is recalculated as well. So we haven't actually changed the formula in F9, but the value changed because of a change in the value in the cell F7. Now the formula you can see here in F9 is a pretty straightforward formula. It's a formula to add the contents of 5 cells together, and of course in Excel formulae can become extremely complex. And if you look at, say, the length of the formula bar there right across my screen, you could have formula bar full and more than full in terms of the complexity of the formulae that are possible in Excel. But apart from writing out a sum like this, equals F4 plus F5 plus F6, etc., there are some other ways of doing things like total column of figures that are actually much more efficient ways of doing things. And I'm going to demonstrate one of those to you next. But just before I do, I want to point out one other thing that relates to something that I said earlier as well. If I were to put additional expense in here. So let's suppose that I realized that there was another expense for the 10th of March, March the 10th, that I'd forgotten to include. Let me select row 7 and insert an additional row. Let's go back and see what the formula is in what is now F10. Look at the formula. It's F4 plus F5 plus F6 plus F8 plus F9. What Excel can do is to compensate for things like inserting and deleting rows and columns. So not only do you not need to worry about that because Excel takes care, but obviously you can use that to your advantage. Now let me just undo that. And I'm actually going to delete F9. So don't forget, when I've got that selected, I can either just press the delete key, or I could say clear all, although of course in all will clear formulas, and it will clear contents, and it will clear formats. It'll clear absolutely everything, so that's all cleared. And now I'm going to take a different approach to adding up that column of figures. And the approach I'm going to take is this. I'm going to select F4, keep the mouse key down, drag down to the bottom, and just include F9. Then I'm going to release the mouse key. Now I mentioned this little icon down here before. Ignore that for the moment, the quick analysis icon. Don't worry about that for the moment. What we're going to do is to go up to the editing group on the ribbon, and next to the auto sum button we're going to choose sum. And unsurprisingly, the total we get is back to $325.20, the same as before. Have a formula in F9, but it's a very different formula to the one we had before, because it now uses the Excel function of sum. And the general format for a function is that you'll have the name of the function, in this case sum. Then you'll normally have a set of brackets, and then in this case there is called a range of cells. So it's a range from F4 to F8. And the range is indicated by a starting cell, then a colon, then the ending cell in the range. Now in this case those two cells are in the same column, but in fact they could be in different rows and columns. So a range is actually a rectangle of cells, and in this case the top left of the rectangle is F4 and the bottom right of the rectangle is F8. So we have a little sort of sub of cells. So in that formula we're using the function sum. Now one of the big advantages of using the sum function there is you haven't got to type in the list of cell names, but there are some other advantages to it as well. And let me do what I did just now and insert a row corresponding to a missing expense. So let me select row 7 again, do an insert, and let's now look at that formula. And the formula is still just equals sum, but in this case not only does it cover the correct range from F4 to now F9, but if I put a value in here, let's say I put a value in there of say 1730, it would be included in the calculation. Because by using that function I didn't have to specifically mention the new F7. All I needed to say was the range, and F7 is automatically included because in that range. So that's a big advantage of using a function here. Now let me just undo that last couple of operations. And the other thing that is particularly useful about this approach, let's suppose that instead of adding up those expense amounts, I wanted for some reason to find which the largest was. If I click within the formula bar and delete the word sum and instead change it to the word max, what I'll see there is the max figure in that column. So the maximum amount is 127.50. Or what about the average figure? Now, as I start typing that function name, a whole list of the functions that begin with the letter A appears. And at this point, if I wanted to just scroll down, find the one I want, oh, average, that's the one I want. Let's take that. Tick that. The average expense amount is $65.04. In Excel 2016, there is a very, very large number of functions available. So in this section, I've introduced you to the basics of formulas and functions. In the next section, we'll start looking at some more complex calculations and how to set those up efficiently and effectively in Excel 2016. So I'll see you then. Hello again and welcome back to our course on Excel 2016. In this section, we're going to look at a couple of aspects of managing workbooks. And the first aspect we're going to look at is how to have more than one workbook open at a time. Now, there are various reasons why you may want to have more than one workbook open at a time. For instance, you may want to copy information between books, or you may want to set up a linkage between the two workbooks. And in fact, Excel 2016, in theory, you can have a very, very large number of workbooks open at once. In practice, there may be restrictions placed by a combination of the size of the workbooks and the amount of memory, the resources in general, on your computer, on your device. But to all intents and purposes, normally with a modern computer with a reasonable amount of resources, you can open as many workbooks at once as you want. I have one workbook open here, House Refurbishment 3. I want to open a second workbook. And in order to do that, all I need to do is to go to the File tab, into Backstage View, click on Open. Now let me open one of the other workbooks that I've been working on the course, for electricity. And I've now got two workbooks open. And of course it's straightforward to create a new workbook. So if I use the normal keystroke keyboard combination of Ctrl+N, I also now have a new book called Book 1. When you have two or more workbooks open, you'll want to be able to switch between them. There are a number of ways of doing this. One way is to, if you click on the View tab and look at the window group, one of the options there, switch windows on the right, click on the drop down, and there is the list of the three workbooks that I've got open. And by selecting one of those, I will switch to that workbook. As I mentioned just now, a few ways of switching between open workbooks. Let me just demonstrate one of the others, and that is if I move the cursor down, hover over the Excel icon on Windows 10 taskbar, you'll see there thumbnails for the three workbooks I have open, and by clicking on one of those thumbnails, that will take me to the relevant workbook. You can also use task switching in Windows. So for instance, I tend to use the keyboard combination Alt Tab, so hold the Alt key down and repeatedly press the Tab key to take me through the open applications, in this case the open workbooks, and when I get to the Excel workbook that I want to work on, I just release the Alt key and I am to work on that particular workbook. So you can use Windows task switching in the usual way. If, as in this case, I have a particular workbook open, I can close it and the other two will remain open. So even if I use the close button in the top there, the close Excel button, If I close that, the other two workbooks are still open and available to me. Let me once again create a new workbook. So I'm going to use the keyboard shortcut Control N again. I now have 3 workbooks again, and instead of switching between them, what I'm going to do is to arrange things so I can see all 3 at once. If I go to the View tab, one of the options there is Arrange All, and if I click on Arrange All, I get a little Arrange Windows dialog, and I can choose how I would like my 3 workbooks arranged. I'm going to leave you to experiment with the options here, but I'm going to start first of all just with a demonstration of what vertical looks like, and there you can see a vertical arrangement of my 3 workbooks. Now you might think that, well, there's something strange going on. There's monthly electricity, I can't see any data. That's only because the content is over to the right in the sheet. Each of these windows with a workbook in it has its own zoom and scroll controls and so on. So in that middle view, the one of my monthly electricity account, I can use the scroll bar there to move around. It also has its own zoom control. So if I need to see things, I can change the zoom in that one single window. So in that way, I can do things like compare the contents of 2 or 3 workbooks. Now at any time, I can restore them to being maximized. I can basically undo the tiling of those windows. Note that whichever workbook I've got selected at the time, I'll see all the normal controls. So for instance, I could maximize that one. It goes back to full size again. Let's put it back to 100%. So it's very flexible in terms of how you can arrange the views of all of your open workbooks. And as I say, I'm going to leave you to experiment with some of those others. Don't forget, if you get a bit lost and you sort of find things a bit jumbled up, you can always go back to the approach that I showed you just now. For example, go back down to the taskbar, hover over, and here the house refurbishment workbook is still at the size it was when I was looking at the 3 of them vertically arranged side by side. I can just go back to that one, minimize it, change its zoom and so on. What I want to do next is to demonstrate copy and paste between workbooks. What I'm going to do is to select some of the information about these floor areas from the house refurbishment book. So I'm going to select a block of cells. I'm going to select that block of cells. I'm going to do a copy using the keyboard. That's Control C. And then I'm going to switch into the empty workbook, book 3. I'm going to just select a single cell and paste. Use the keyboard, Control V, and that looks absolutely fine. If I click in one of those cells, such as D4, you notice how I've actually got the number there, 5.2, 5.2, etc. And the words are exactly the word I had in the original copy. I can adjust column widths and so on. Now let me go back to the refurbishment workbook. This time I'm going to copy this block of cells, the ones that give the floor area. So it's a copy, and then back into what was the empty book. Click there, do a paste. Now let's look at what we've actually got for the floor area for the dining room. And what we've got is equals D4 times E4. It's actually adjusted that formula to allow for the fact that we've used a different set of cells. We're in a different workbook altogether actually. And Excel is able to adapt not only for the change in the row and column numbers as necessary, which I mentioned earlier on in the course, but it's also adapted for the fact that we've moved to a completely different workbook. Now let me go back into refurbishment yet again, and this time I'm going to copy the budget flooring cost figures. And copy, and then back into my new book. Once again do a paste, and once again it has correctly come up with the figures, the budget flooring costs. Now the thing a little bit strange here is that if you remember, when I was calculating this budget flooring cost, I was using a reference sheet to hold the cost per square metre of the flooring. So let's take a look at the formulas here. And the formulas here now say multiply F4 in this case, so that's the floor area of the dining room, by, and the reference figure that it's given me is a reference figure from the house refurbishment workbook. So it actually refers to the other workbook by name, and in fact the name of the other workbook is put in square brackets. So it's got square brackets house refurbishment 3.xlsx, then it's got the name of the sheet, which is reference, and overall in fact the name of the sheet is house refurbishment 3.xlsx, that's the workbook name, then the sheet which is reference, and then I get the exclamation mark, the bang, saying that the cost per square metre on that sheet is in cell $E$2. So you can see how in a formula it's now referring to a completely different workbook within that formula. So you can see how Excel formulas can actually span not only more than one sheet, but actually more than one workbook as well. So having looked at how cells in workbooks can refer to cells in other workbooks, let me return to something else that we looked at briefly earlier in the course, and that was moving and copying sheets, but now moving and copying sheets between workbooks. Suppose that I wanted to copy the room sizes sheet to the new workbook. So I go to the original, the house refurbishment book, select room sizes, right click, move or copy, and I'm going to choose from the available books. Now at the moment the book that's shown is the one I'm currently working on, House Refurbishment 3. Let's look at what else is available. There's book 3, and I can decide where I want to put it. Well, I'm going to make a copy at the end of book 3. Now by making a copy, of course, that means I'll also have this room sizes sheet in House Refurbishment 3, but I'll have a copy of it in book 3. So let's click on OK. That's now copied, and if you look in book 3 you can see a copy of that sheet. Let's now go back into House Refurbishment. Let's now select the reference sheet, right click on the reference sheet. I'm going to move the reference sheet. I'm going to move it to book 3. Not copy it, move it. Or copy, book 3. I'm going to move, so I won't check the create a copy box. I'm going to put it at the end, click on OK. I've moved that sheet. Now if in book 3 I go back to sheet 1 again, you notice that my amounts of money are still correct. Let's have another look at that formula, the one we were looking at just now. Excel has realized that I've moved the reference sheet between open books. It's no longer in the House Refurbishment 3 book, it's in the current book. So it can reference that cell just by using the sheet name reference, and then it just says reference bang $E$2. That's the absolute cell reference for the cell containing the cost of flooring per square metre. But once again you can see how intelligent Excel is when we come to moving and copying sheets around. Now finally, what I'd like to look at in this section quite briefly is information about workbooks. We're talking about managing workbooks here, and it's very often very useful to keep information about your workbooks and also to be able to check certain information about workbooks that Excel maintains for you. If you go into Backstage View and look at the info page, over on the right hand side you have some information about the workbook. Now much of that information is maintained by Excel. So for instance, the size of the workbook, this one is 15.9 kilobytes. The related dates, when was it last modified? when was it created? This workbook, or in fact the original version of this workbook, was created a very, very long time ago. It's been modified over many versions of Excel, and it was last printed about 1.5 years ago. So as you can see, I don't print workbooks out very often. The author, that's me. Who it was last modified by, that's me. And as you can see, there are various other properties as well. Now right at the bottom you have show all properties. That will show additional information. And when you're showing all properties, you've got an option at the bottom, show fewer. And right at the top you have properties with a little drop down arrow next to it. Click on that. Click on advanced properties and you see a properties dialog which contains 5 tabs of information about a workbook. Now some of that information, as I say, is maintained by Excel. So for instance, when it was created, when it was modified, when it was last printed, the size of the workbook, the location and so on. But the information, such as the information on the summary sheet, you maintain yourself. So you can type in a title, you can type in a subject, you can record your own name the way you want to see it. This is work that you're doing at work. You may want to put your manager or the manager of the project this refers to there, the name of your company and so on. You then have some statistics, including the ones I've mentioned already. Contents, this summarizes things like which worksheets are included, named ranges are included. I'll be talking about named ranges a little bit later on. And then you can also have custom properties as well. Now custom properties are outside the scope of what we're doing on this course. One of the areas that many people find very useful is the set of properties that are on this summary sheet though. And if you put a title on a workbook, you describe a subject, it's very often useful when you come back to look at old workbooks to remember what the purpose of those workbooks is. Now, what I suggest you do now, this is not speaking an exercise, but maybe something you should do now and hopefully get into the habit of doing, is for all of the exercises that you've done so far, just make sure you've put a title in that title field there at the top of the summary sheet, and make sure that your own name is in the author field as well. And you'll notice that I've done that on the exercises and the demo files that are included with the course. So hopefully I haven't missed any of those. Make sure you do that as well from now on. That's the end of this section. Please join me in the next one. Hello again and welcome back to our course on Excel 2016. We're now turn our attention back to the core of Excel, and having looked briefly at formulae and functions earlier on, we're now going to look at functions in particular in a lot of detail in this section and in fact the next few sections. Now there are actually hundreds of functions in Excel, and some of them require quite a detailed knowledge of particular areas such as statistics, mathematics and so on. But I'm going to concentrate on some of the most common functions that you're likely to need, particularly when you're just starting out with Excel and as your knowledge and use of Excel develops. Now, in order to learn about some of these functions, I'm going to develop an invoice for a bathroom company called Shower Power, who are based in the USA. Basically, they put together and install bathrooms and shower rooms for people. Now, as part of this, they have to produce invoices, and their invoices are not just simple documents that somebody enters in a word processing application such as Word. Their invoices involve accessing very simple types of database with details of the products they use and with details of their customers. And the invoice that we're going to develop in the coming sections is going to be based on the use of what are effectively databases of information and Excel functions. So let's get started. Now, one of the first things I need to explain to you is what I mean by databases. You may be worried at this point that I'm going to start teaching you how to use Access or something like that. Very many commercial databases are operated purely on the basis use of Microsoft Excel. And one of the things that I hope you'll see in this and the next few sections is how in effect you can set up a database system in Excel. Now, with this particular workbook, Shower Power Invoice.xlsx, I've already created total of 3 sheets, and one of the sheets, the third one there, is actually customers. Now in effect, the contents of that customers sheet is a very small example of a part of a database. I have information about 4 customers, each has an account number, the name of the customer, it's a company name, the name of the contact at the company, at the customer, and then I have the terms for that customer, whether the customer receives a discount, and the first 2 lines of the company's address. Now, in reality, I would have many other pieces of information about each of these customers, but I think you'll get the hang of all this on the basis of just the amount of information that's there. The second worksheet shows the list of parts that Shower Power supplies, and for each part there's a product code, a description, a quantity or size, a list price, and a discount percentage where a discount is applied. Now you'll notice that in column F there is a column which is supposed to contain the net price, the price after discount of any particular part. So where a discount is applied, this would give the net price. And in effect, one of the little design decisions we might make would be whether we would store the discounted prices on the sheet or whether we would actually calculate them in the invoice itself. You'll see what I mean by this a little bit later on. So in effect, that list of customers and that list of parts is basis of our database, and what we're going to do is to use this information to create invoices. Now the first sheet is my sort of invoice template, and all that I've put on this invoice template at the moment is some fixed information. So for example, I put the word invoice at the top, I've put Shower Power, the company name there, and then a few headings. At the bottom I've got please contact the customer services department, thank you for your business, etc. So what we're now going to do is to start to fill in on this invoice various parts which are variable. So these are the parts that will be different between customers. I'm not necessarily going to put all of these in, but I'm going to add quite a few of them over this and the next few sessions. Now one thing you may already have noticed about the invoice is that there are no lines shown. I'm not going to show horizontal and vertical lines on this invoice, but very often if you're working in Excel and you're trying to align things, it is a good idea to show the grid lines while you're working. So what I'm going to do is to go to the View tab and switch the grid lines on. That will help quite a bit with alignment and seeing where we need to do anything with cells and rows and columns and so on. And what I'm going to do first in this section is to show you how to use a lookup function, and the function we're going to use is called VLOOKUP. What I'm going to do is to put an account number in here, and on the basis of that account number I'm going to get some detail of the relevant customer and put them up here to represent part of the customer's address. So I'm going to put them up here. So let's go over to the customer's sheet and let's look. The first account number I've got there is 2307. So let's go back and put 2307 in the account number. And then what I want to do is to put into this cell here, D5, the name of the customer contact. Now of course if I look at the customer's sheet I can see who that is. It's Dorothy Walensky. But I want that to happen automatically. And the way that I do it is to use the VLOOKUP function. Now if I go to the Formulas tab, you'll see on the Formulas tab a function library. And within the function library, one category of function is lookup and reference. So click on lookup and reference. And the one I'm going to use here is VLOOKUP. There is also an HLOOKUP. VLOOKUP stands for vertical lookup, HLOOKUP stands for horizontal lookup. And which of those you use depends on how your data is arranged on your reference sheet. In this case, my customers sheet. In this case, my records, my customer records are arranged vertically. So I'm going to look at the VLOOKUP function. I'm going to use the VLOOKUP function. Now what you see is this function arguments dialog, a very clever little which is going to make it very straightforward for us to set this up. But I want you to read carefully the information about how this function works. Looks for a value in the leftmost column of a table and then returns a value in the same row from a column you specify. By default, the table must be sorted in an ascending order. Now, the very first thing we're going to enter here is going to be the lookup value. But before we do that, let's just check that our table is in ascending order. So let me cancel this. Let me go back to my customers sheet. And my account numbers, they're not in ascending order. 23073210, and then they're out of order. Now I could do a little bit of cut and paste, put those in the right order. Alternatively, I can easily sort a sheet, in this case by default on the first column. If I just select that sheet, go to the Data tab, in the Sort and Filter group that I'm going to talk a lot more about later in the course, this top left-hand button here, Sort Smallest to Largest, by default works on the first column. So that sorts everything into the correct sequence. So now the table I'm going to look up is in the correct sequence. So let's go back to the invoice. Let's once again go to Formulas, Lookup and Reference, back to VLOOKUP. Now we can proceed. Now the value we're going to look up on the customers sheet is the value in C17. I could type in that first box in the function arguments dialog C17, but in fact if I click in there, Excel does it for me. Now the next I specify is the table array. Notice as I click through these fields that an explanation of what each of those fields is given lower down in the dialog. Table array is a table of text, numbers or logical values in which data is retrieved. Table array can be a reference to a range name. I'm going to talk about range names later on. For the moment we're going to make it a table array. So I'm going to click on the customers sheet. Note how that dialog is on top. Now let me select the array that contains all of my data. So that's the cells from A2 to G5. And that is my table array. Customers, bang, so the customers sheet A2 to G5. Now the third field is the col index num. It's the column number in the table array from which the matching value will be returned. Now the first thing I want here is the name of the contact. So that's actually the third column. So the column number is 3, the number 3. And now finally what we need to enter is range lookup. Now this is a logical value that determines whether we're looking for a closest match, in which we put true in here, or whether we want to find an exact match. Now in this case we must have an exact match on account number, so we type in here false, on OK, and we find in cell D5 on the invoice that we have the name Dorothy Walensky. Now that appears to be fine. Let's just do a check. Let me look for one of the other account numbers. What about 5112? Let's put the other account number in cell C17, 5112, ticket. That's good, I get Zach Stevens, so that seems to be fine. Now what would I put in the next cell down? That's what I have in cell D5. What would I put in D6? Well, let's just try doing a fill down, shall we? You probably already worked out that this isn't going to work at all, but let's do it anyway. Of course it doesn't work at all, because what doesn't work at all here is that Excel just moves everything down a row, in which case C17 is no longer C17, it's looking for C18, which won't help at all. The lookup table on the customer sheet is no longer A2 to G5, it's put A3 to G6, so it definitely doesn't work. The one way getting around this, of course, would be to do the VLOOKUP individually on any of those cells. But another way of doing it, and probably the better way of doing it, when we set up the VLOOKUP, is to use absolute cell references for the cell references, because C17 isn't going to change and the range on the customer's sheet isn't going to change either. So let me put absolute cell references in here. Okay, that's better. Now let me do a fill down for, say, 4 rows. Because it'll help a little bit. I'll get Zach Stevens every time. But if what I really want here, instead of Zach Stevens 4 times, is the company name, then the first line of the address, then the second line of the address. Let's look at the customer's sheet. The company name is column 2 and the address is in columns 6 and 7. So let's go back to the invoice. Let's say that one is column 2. That one is column 6. Notice I'm only changing the column number. That one is column 7. That looks better. Now let's go back to that earlier account number again, 2307 ticket, and that's fine. That seems to be working perfectly. So finally in this section, what I'd like to do is to put the customer's terms of business in here. Now that's from column 4 on the customer's sheet. So if I just take one of these, do a copy, Control C, do a paste, Control V, look at the formula, change that to column 4, ticket, and as you can see, 7 days. Let's try changing the account number, 5112, ticket, and as you can see, that works perfectly as well. That's the VLOOKUP function. Please join. Welcome back to our course on Excel 2016. In this section we're going to start to look at what many people consider to be one of the greatest strengths of Excel. That is the ability to create really good graphs and charts. So people use graphs and charts in Excel. Well, usually it's to strengthen a message, or sometimes to actually give the message itself. As the saying goes, a picture can paint 1,000 words, and very often, particularly with complex data, a picture can help people to understand the data without getting too baffled by all of the numbers. Now I should warn you that the area of graphs and charts in Excel is a pretty vast area, so we're going to start with the basics as usual, and I'm going to use some very straightforward data here about the lengths of a number of rivers in Africa and the drainage basins for some of the rivers. And what I'm going to do first of all is to create a straightforward graph or chart to illustrate the length of those 8 rivers. So let's just ignore the drainage basins for a moment. What I'm going to do first of all is to select the data that I want to draw the graph or chart of. So I select from A1 down to B9, and then I go to the Insert tab, and one of the groups on the Insert tab is Charts, and I'm going to click first on Recommended Charts, because once you've selected some data, what Excel 2016 can do for you is to recommend a suitable type of chart. The recommendations it makes are on the left here. There are 4 of them. First of all, it says clustered column. Now I'm going to assume that you're not very familiar with types of graph and chart, although many of you will be. I'll briefly explain each as we go along. A clustered column, basically we have vertical columns, and each column corresponds to a category. Now Excel assumes in this case that the categories are in column A, so A2 down to A9, so we have a category Okavango and a category Orange and so on. And then on the vertical scale, on the vertical axis, it plots what it calls the value, and the values in this case are the lengths of the rivers. So as you can see, it's taken each of our rivers and plotted a column. Now note the little summary underneath the chart. The column chart is used to compare values across a few categories. Use it when the number of categories is not important. The second option it offers is really similar, but it's flipped over. It's what's called a clustered bar chart. This time the categories are on the vertical axis, the values are horizontal. So you're looking at the lengths of the rivers as horizontal bars. The third category of rivers is a pie chart. Now, pie charts most people are familiar with. We slice a pie up in a portion. And here we come to a very important point. When Excel is looking at the data that you've selected, it has no idea what it means. And in this case, if you're used to charts or statistics and so on, you probably realize that a pie chart would be an extremely bad choice of chart here, because a pie chart implies that you're dividing something, you're dividing the pie into parts. Now, these 8 rivers, the lengths of them do not, when added up, add to a whole something. It's not sort of the length of all the rivers in the world or something like that, and it's divided between these 8. They happen to have those 8 lengths, but those 8 lengths added together don't form a total of something. So a pie chart will not be suitable. However, Excel doesn't know that. You understand this, Excel doesn't. So it offers you a pie chart, and you need to be aware of the meaning of pie charts to realize that this is not a suitable chart in this case. The fourth option is one of the new types of chart in Excel 2016, and it's what's called a Pareto chart. Now, I'm not going to talk about Pareto charts at the moment. It's associated with something you may have heard of called Pareto or Pareto analysis. Again, this would not be a suitable chart in this case. I'll back to Pareto a little bit later on in the course. So really the best choices here will be either the column chart or the bar chart. Either of them are possible. Some people avoid column charts in this kind of situation because quite often people associate the columns as in some way progressing with time. Of course, in this case there is no progression with time, and anybody looking at this clustered column chart, should we to draw it, certainly should not imply any change over time. But because sometimes people make this time inference, many people would go for the clustered bar in this case, but in effect either of them are totally suitable. Now, before I actually draw the chart in this case, what I want to do is to take a look at the All Charts tab in the Insert Chart dialog, because listed there you effectively see all of the available chart types. And in addition, at the very top you've got a tab that says Recent, which shows you the recently created types of chart. Gives you quick access to the ones you've used most recently. You also have access to any chart templates that you may have created or acquired, and then you have a list of all the different chart types. Now, the fact that you have selected the data of the type that you have will to a large extent determine which types of chart you can actually draw from that data. And in fact, with a very straightforward selection like the selection here, most of these charts you could draw, but some of them you couldn't. For instance, you couldn't draw a stock chart, because for a stock chart you need high, low and close stock market figures to be selected, and Excel can tell that what you have here is not high, low and close figures. Often, and particularly when you've got used to the different types of chart in Excel, you may go to this All Charts tab here and go straight to the sort of chart that you want to select. Now, in addition, let me now cancel that. I will come back to it in a moment. If you go back to the Charts group, there are a number of icons within the group which represent the most popular types of charts. So you've got things like hierarchy chart, waterfall or stock chart, and then you've got statistical charts, and most of these have drop downs, and on the drop down you have the main charts of that particular type, and then usually access to some more. And then in the bottom right hand corner of the charts group there's a little dialog box launcher, and that gets you back into the Insert Chart dialog. So as you can see, there's a very wide range of charts, and to some extent, if you haven't done this sort of thing before, you really need to rely on a bit of experience, and you'll soon find that you start to know which charts to use in each situation. So I'm going to create now a clustered column chart. So I'm going to click on OK, and there is my chart. Now, to the right of it you will see 3 buttons. There's one with a plus, one with a pen, with a filter on it. I'm going to talk about those later on in the course, so don't worry about those at the moment. Let's concentrate for now on the chart area itself. Within the chart area there are a number of things. There's the chart itself, of course. You can see the vertical columns. You have a horizontal axis with the categories on it. In this case the categories are the names of the rivers. And then on the left hand side you can see the scale for the vertical axis, and the vertical axis in this case contains the values, and the values are the lengths in kilometers. Now there are many other things that you can add to charts, as we're going to see, and to some extent Excel does its best job to make your chart complete as quickly as possible. But sometimes what it does is not really up to the job. So for instance, if I hover over length kilometers here, what Excel has done is to make length brackets kilometers the chart title. It didn't actually have anything else to use, so it used that. I definitely want to give this chart a better title than that, and I'm going to do that in a section. But you can see here the basics of a straightforward chart, some of the main features. Now, as we'll see in the next section, there are many ways that we can customize this, as I've already said. When you have a chart selected like this one, you get two additional tabs on the ribbon, and these two tabs, there's a design tab and a format tab, are described together as the chart tools. And with those chart tools we can do all sorts of things in terms of changing the design. So for instance, we can use this gallery of chart styles here and completely change the style of the chart. And then with the format tab we can do a lot in terms of individually formatting the way the text appears and so on, but more of that later. One very straightforward thing you can do is to resize a chart just by using the resizing handle. So for instance, if I wanted to make this chart bigger, I'd hover over the top left hand corner, get the appropriate cursor, the cursor, release the cursor, and my chart is much bigger. A thing that you can do with a chart, and this is in fact a very important feature, is that you can move a chart. By default it's created on the same sheet as the data which it is representing, but sometimes you may want the chart to be created on a completely different sheet, or indeed you may want to create it on a special type of sheet called a chart sheet. And a chart sheet is unlike a regular worksheet. It's, if you like, the other type of worksheet in that it doesn't contain cells where you use formulae and functions and so on. It's there really to hold a chart. And chart sheets can be very helpful, particularly if, for example, you want to do a presentation with a chart in it and you don't want the presentation to be sort of confused by having the data in the background as you have here, or even by having lots of cells and rows and columns and things. Basically you can have the chart sitting on its own. I should point out, of course, that when you've got a chart you can very easily copy it into a completely different type of Office document, such as a PowerPoint presentation or a Word document. Let me show you how to move this sheet. Let's go back to the Chart Tools Design tab. At the right hand end in the location group there is a Move Chart button, and then basically I'm given a choice, and the choice is to either keep this as an object in the Rivers sheet, or in fact I could put it in any other available worksheet, or I can move it to a chart sheet. In this case I'm going to move it to a new chart sheet. I'm going to call the chart sheet River Lengths Chart, and I'm going to click on OK. And there is the chart on its own chart sheet, and as you can see the chart sheet doesn't have the background with the cells and rows and columns, and particularly if you were to hide the ribbon and the formula bar you could make a very straightforward presentation of the lengths of the rivers without any sort of distractions. So that's it. That's how to create a basic chart. In the next section we're going to look at customization. So welcome back to our course on Excel 2016. We're now going to cover a few aspects of what I'm going to call data management in Excel 2016. First thing we're going to look at, and that's what we're going to look at in this section, is sorting. I've returned to the top 50 movies list here, and we're going to do a bit of work on sorting this in various sequences. Now, although the basics of sorting in Excel are very straightforward, there are a couple of easy ways to come unstuck, and also there are flexible and powerful features in Excel that you should be aware of. So I'm going to make a couple of deliberate errors going through this section. I will obviously point them out as I go. But let's suppose we wanted to sort this list not by its position in the top 50 chart, but by the title of the movies. So let me select column A, which is the column with the movie titles in it. Go to the Data tab on the ribbon, and in the Data tab, in the Sort and Filter group, there are three buttons on the left related to sorting. Now, the top left one, sort A to Z, lowest to highest. This sort whatever I've got selected in A to Z order. Now, when it says lowest to highest, that relates to text. If in fact what I had in this column was a set of currency values, say the prices of the DVDs of these movies, sorting into order would sort into ascending or descending price order. And as we'll see in a moment, if we were say sorting on year of release, it would be on numerical order. And there are a couple of gotchas hidden in that you need to be aware of. But when it comes to a straightforward text sort, so in this case sorting the title of the movies, in theory it's a straightforward job. If I want them in ascending alphabetical order, I click the A to Z button. The button below it is the Z to A button, that's highest to lowest, but I want lowest to highest. Microsoft Excel found data next to your selection. Since you have not selected the data, it will not be sorted. So if I select the column title but not the column year of release, then what will happen is it will sort the titles without sorting the years of release. So what would happen is that the titles and the years of release would get separated from each other. Now there are some situations where you may actually want to do that, but they must be pretty few and far between. And normally what you'll want to do is to do what it says here, expand the selection. And that means that Excel will select all of the columns in the worksheet and sort them all. So I'm going to say expand the selection, leave that there. If I did want to select just that one column, I'd choose the second option, continue with the current selection. But I'm doing expand the selection, click on sort, and it sorted them into alphabetical order. Now, one or two of the little gotchas that you need to be aware of here. One of them is that when it does this, it does it purely on the basis of alphabetical order. So look at what the first movie in the list is, 12 Angry Men. Now, why does it put 12 Angry Men at the beginning? Well, because as far as computers, PCs are concerned, 1 comes before A. So the 1 in 12 Angry Men is before the A in Alien. And as a sort of related type of issue, although some people would say this isn't an issue at all of the thes, The Dark Knight, The Dark Rises, The Departed, The Godfather, etc., all of the thes are under T towards the end of the list. Now you might see that as a problem, and what some people do, I'm not going to do this now, but what some people do to overcome this problem is they would have a different additional column here, and what they might put in the additional column is what we'll call the title for sorting, or the sort title. So when they're storing this information, they actually put an additional field which is the sort field. Now I'm not going to go into that now, but it is something for you to be aware of. One of the other things to be aware of is that, to all intents and purposes, I've made a bit of a mistake here, because if I now closed this particular workbook and opened it up again and said, no, I want to put them back in order again, I want to put them back in the sequence of top 50, of course I have no longer got the sequence of top 50, because they're only in the top 50 sequence on the basis of their row numbers, and I didn't have a separate column with the chart positions in it. It's very important that you have a column for all the values that you may want to sort on. So at this stage I can still do an undo. I inserted a new column, gave it a title, used the format painter to copy the title format from B1 to A1. I've typed a 1 in cell A2. Now I'm going up to do fill, and I'm going to do series, and I'm going to do a series in columns, linear, step value 1, stop value 50, OK, and there we are, I've got 1 to 50. Now one of the great flexibilities when you're sorting it in Excel is that you can sort on more than one column. So let's suppose that what I want to do here is to sort by year of release, but within year of release I want to sort by title. Back in the sort and filter group, there's one other button we haven't used, the sort button here, and this brings up the sort dialog. Now by default this will normally contain details of the last sort you did, so sort by position, sort on values, sort smallest to largest. I don't want to do that. If I want to delete a level, let me just delete that level and let me add a new level. I want to sort by year of release. I want values smallest to largest. Let's do that first thing. Click on OK. Now you'll see that the movies are sorted. The oldest ones, City Lights 1931, Modern Times 1936, and so on. And if you go down to 1994, you've got The Shawshank Redemption, Pulp Fiction, Forrest Gump and Leon, all 4 of those in 1994. Let's do sort again. Let's add a level and say that after year of release we want to sort on title A to Z. Click on OK, and now within 1994 we have them sorted by alphabetical order of title: Forrest Gump, Leon, Pulp Fiction, The Shawshank Redemption. And of course it would be very easy to change that second criterion from title to position, say. So within 1994 we'd have the highest rated movie, The Shawshank Redemption, then Pulp Fiction, then Forrest Gump, then Leon. So that's a combination of 2 or more columns to sort. Now there are just 2 other things to point out here. One of them is I haven't mentioned the headers on this sheet. And speaking, Excel is pretty good at working out that you have or you don't have headers on a sheet. So when, for example, it sorted these movies by title, it didn't actually take the word title right at the top there in B1 as the name of a movie, and it's usually pretty good at that. But you can control that if you are having problems and you either are having a title included that you don't want included or vice versa. In the sort dialog there is a checkbox here, My Data Has Headers, and you can check or uncheck that depending on whether your data has headers. In this case Excel decided on its own that it did have headers, and that was the correct decision. The second thing to bear in mind here is this options button. There are 2 other options. Probably you might not use either of these often or even at all. You can make sorts case sensitive if you need to. So for example, in the case of sorting text fields, capital T and small t would sort differently. So case sensitivity is a possibility. And also, although in the vast majority of cases you will be sorting rows in a worksheet, you can actually sort the columns. You can do a left to right sort. I've been using Excel for a very, very long time. I've never had to do a left to right sort, but I have actually tried it and it does work. So a couple of other things to be aware of. That's it on sorting. Please join. Hello again and welcome back to our course on Excel 2016. In this session we're going to look at find and replace. In fact, the command we're going to use is the find and select command that is at the right hand end of the home tab on the ribbon, and find and replace are just 2 of the things that you can do using the drop down menu from this command. We're also going to look at 1 or 2 others, and the first one we're going to look at is go to. If I click on go to, I can go to a specific point in the workbook. Now I could type in a reference here, so for instance I could type in flashfill A1, click on OK, it'll take me to that cell in the workbook. You will have noticed though one of the other options there was to go to I choose one of the names. So I could say, take me to the painting cost per square metre cell. Click there and it takes me through to E4 on the reference sheet. One of the ways in which most of the commands that are accessible from find and select can be useful is if you're dealing with perhaps a large workbook to find particular things, it is a great way of finding your way around. Let me look at another option way, but we'll also illustrate something else about the use of these commands. On the reference sheet, I'm going to look for formulas on their go-to formulas. Now this formulas on this particular sheet, and there are none on this sheet. Back to the floors sheet, note that cell A1 is selected. Try that again. Go to formulas. This will go to the formulas sheet, and of course all of the highlights tells that each of them has a formula in it. So that's pretty typical. The thing can be tie around a workbook using those commands. So a good range of commands there that can be helpful in many situations, but I want to concentrate now on find and replace. Note that the cell selected on this sheet is E5. I want to find the room, so I'm going to click on the find and select and then select find, and I'm going to type in the word room. And first of all, click on find next. Now notice from E5 find next or find living room. That was the next step before it found room. It didn't go to dining room, it went to living room. If you click on find next, it finds room within the word bathroom. One of the options is to do a find all, and this will find all occurrences. Click find all, and what I get is a little list down here that I can scroll through to find all occurrences of the word. The thing you may notice is that all of those occurrences are on the sheet. So let's look at the options. The options say find, well, I'm finding room. I don't format for that word, but these. What am I seeing within? I'm finding within sheet, find within work. Search by rows, so I'm the occurrences of your. You can choose, and you could be looking in form values because I'll only have room as value. And say match the case, say match case here. It wouldn't have a capital R, but it would find a small r. So let's say match case. And you can also see with higher cell contents or just set those options. Let's do a find all again. And it takes me to the first occurrence, refurbishment estimation. Let me just pull the bottom of the dialog down. But you can see I've actually got quite a long list now of matches. And matches cover each. So if I want to go, say, particular match on the first, if I click on that, it'll take me to that cell. And there's bathroom in 8 on the floors. Now let me run through an example of a replace. If you look at cell B12 on this sheet, you'll see master bath. I may have written master bath in some places and master bathroom in others. Wherever it says master bath, I want it to master bathroom. But I don't want to change master bathroom to bathroom room, so I need to ensure that I get exactly master bath. So the find what I'm going to change, and I'll change it to master bath. I'm going to say match case, and I'm also going to say match entire cell contents. It must say all of and only master bath. I'm going to look at the workbook, I'm going to search by rows, I'm going to look in values, and I'm going to replace it with, click on the replace tab and put in what I want to replace it with. I'm going to replace it with master bathroom. So let's do a find next. Found master bath. When I click on replace, it will replace that and find the next one. Okay, that seems to be okay. It's gone to the next one, master bath. I'm going to trust my replacement. I'm going to click on replace all. We have made two replacements. Bear in mind that it had done one before, which I did, the first replacement that I did. So click on OK. And wherever it previously said master bath, it should say master room. 3 occurrences in total. That's how to do a replace. That's the end. I'll see you in the next one.